Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. So glad you could join us. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. We have a really great show for you tonight. But first, I want to thank Ken Quiethawk for his intro. He is an amazing man, and you can find him at nativestorytellers.com. Check out the site. It's a great site, and you'll learn a lot about our history that I bet the textbooks didn't teach you.
Contributions to America's prehistory. This same information seems like it's being confirmed by recent archaeology, and she's going to be explaining that to us shortly. So I'll be calling her in a minute to get her set up. I guess I could do it now, but it should be some really interesting stuff. Like we're going to be getting into some of these plates that have unidentified writing on them.
Uh-huh.
So this is some pretty neat stuff. So I'm looking forward to this, and it's probably close enough time for me to give her a call. Let's see, when am I start doing the production stuff? This isn't one of my fortes, but I'm getting a little bit better. But I don't find it cumbersome.
Was she going to call in?
Hello.
What were the last four digits?
Oh,
You got her?
Yep, I have her.
Okay.
I'm here.
My producing skills are working a little bit better each time I do this. Okay.
Okay.
So okay. I think we have her here. I heard her say hello. So we are adding another one of my bosses to the show. It's Utahna Jessop is one of my colleagues at Ancient American Magazine. She's Ancient American Magazine's manager of the West Coast Field Investigator Program. Or a little bit about that one too. She's a contributing author as well. Always liked her treasure hunting article. That was a good one. And Utahna has also participated in cross-country bus trips to Mormon archaeological and historical sites, and she has been lecturing on artifacts that support the history presented in the Book of Mormon. So, welcome, Utahna. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very good. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. Yeah, we just I was not impacted for more than like 30 seconds with a little electrical problem before the show started, but for some reason, or I don't know what happened to our first argument. We kind of got started in about 20 minutes of an interesting discussion going on, and there was some kind of tech issue. I don't know what happened there. So we just kind of did a normal one of our rambling type things, and we're just glad to have you join us to elucidate us on some new topics. So
Well, I'm honored to be here. So hope we can have a good discussion.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is going to be a good one. So I'm not a Book of Mormon scholar. I have a copy right here. It is an interesting book, but like I said, I'm not a scholar. But so for those of us in the audience, I think we're probably going to need a some background on what revelations did Joseph Smith have that caused him to write this book? How did it come to be written?
Okay, I'll explain.
Okay.
It actually began with Joseph Smith when he was just a young boy of about 14 years old. And he lived in New York, and he was caught up kind of in the religious fervor of the times. In that time there were a lot of different churches, and a lot of pastors were arguing over who had the truth, and there was just a lot going on religiously. So one night he was reading in his Bible James 1:5, where it says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God." And he got thinking about that and decided that's just what he needed to do. So he knelt before the Lord and he asked which church was true, so he would know which church he should join. Well, he was actually told to join none of them, and the Lord told him that he was chosen for a special thing. He was going to be the one to bring forth a record of the ancient inhabitants of this land and their interaction with the Lord, their lives and their times. So this record would contain not only a history of this people, but much of the gospel that had been lost since the time of the Savior. So Joseph Smith didn't actually write the book at all. He translated an ancient record. Now, an angel visited him, and this angel was actually the scribe that hid up this record 1,400 years before, and this angel showed him where the record was buried, which turned out to be in the Hill Cumorah in New York. It was a record that was written on gold plates and sealed away in a stone box. And so here's this young boy who was commissioned by God to translate this sacred record and publish it for the whole world to read.
Okay. Just a quick question. When Joseph Smith was 14, and this prayer happened about reading James 1:5 and the prayer afterwards, and not getting an answer about none of the churches are right. Okay, what year is this?
This is about right around the 1820s.
Okay, 1820. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
And of course, so So this book became the keystone of the Mormon religion, actually called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's the official name. But people back then, of course, didn't take kindly to the ideas of angels visiting people on earth again, a young prophet, a new religion. He was leading converts away from the established churches, things like that. And so persecution began, and it got pretty ugly in the form of angry neighbors, bloodthirsty mobs. As he published this book, there were people that believed it and of course joined the church with him, and they were just driven from state to state, city to city, across the country by all these people they just hated them. They finally moved way out west, away from the reaches of the United States at the time, and went out to Utah territory to have some peace. So that's how the Book of Mormon actually came to be. But sadly, even though it's an actual historical record of the ancient inhabitants here, it's pretty much ignored in that because of the religious connotation.
Okay, so, we're going to come back to that, but I'm sure most of our listeners have at least heard of the tablets being found in the Hill Cumorah, and I think at the start of the year, Mike and Mason, I think they just made a brief comment about that they had visited there, and it's in their Iroquois Supernatural book that we reviewed. But I'm sure that most people have probably just have heard a little bit about the tablets were the foundation, and there have been I guess like I think just a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks ago, when Scott Walter, one of our buddies from the magazine, when he was a guest with us, he spoke a little bit about that gold, that folded gold plate that was found in Maine, and that had some writing on it that hasn't been identified, and Barbara brought to my attention these Manti metallic plates. So that Joseph Smith's discovery, it isn't just a one-time deal. There are other samples found across the country.
Yes.
Are you familiar with these Manti plates? Okay, so
Manti. If you're talking about
Manti
from Manti, Utah, yes, there were over 60 plates that John Brewer found in a cave in Manti, and they all had writing that was unknown. They've never been deciphered, but those are not the only ones either. The Navajo people, they had records that were written on metal plates. The Ojibwe did. Chief Copway talked a lot about that. He said that most Indian nations of the West have places where they deposit their records. And they themselves have, I think, something like 3 depositories near Lake Superior. But these records can be written on slate rock, lead, birch bark, copper, metal, as well as other mediums. But there are many, many different plates. One of my favorite, and since we're talking about the Book of Mormon, I'll mention this one. The Taliwa were a tribe that were descended from the mound builders, and they lived in the plateau region of the southwestern plains. Well, pre-Columbian times, they suffered a lot of hardship, and so they walked for something like a year to see their Cherokee ancestors, or their Cherokee cousins is what it was. Mm-hmm. And they brought with them thin gold plates with their written language on them. And in fact, both the Creek and the Cherokee syllabary that we have today, not the more modern one, but the older one, both of those are descended from what was written on these Taliwa gold plates. So that's just one of many.
Yeah, Barbara, I think this is pretty much all new information for Nightlight.
I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think we've really covered these kind of plates on any other shows. Okay, so this is some pretty neat stuff. Okay, so.
Okay, so how about if I tell you a few more of them? Would you like to hear some more?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so we have the Joseph Smith ones, the one Scott was talking about, the ones, it's like 60 plates there, and they're and the list keeps growing. I'm not familiar with this at all.
Well, here's another one. The Creek and the Muskogee people were known to have 2 brazen tablets and 5 of copper. And they said that those were given to them by the Great Spirit, and they had handed them down for generations and generations. These were, these crudely cut plates, and they had writing on them that some people who saw them said it looked like some kind of ancient Hebrew writing. And they would keep these plates hidden away and bring them out once a year for a special green corn ceremony. What's interesting about that is that ceremony is very much like the offering of the first fruits that we read about in the Bible. And so they would bring these plates out for this special ceremony, and they'd polish them up good and then hide them away because they were so sacred. They talked about hiding them up with, some of them were hidden up with special men, and others they just kept handing down through the generations. So that's another one. Let's see, I'm trying to think. You mentioned the Manti ones. The Manti ones were in a tomb with some very large bodies. And I think that those bodies might very well be some of the people that are talked about in the Book of Mormon. So
Are they like giant people?
Yes, they are. They're 9 feet tall.
Okay.
So let me give you a little background on the people in the Book of Mormon. Is that okay if I do that?
Okay, because it sounds like you're starting to present enough information where, okay, we need to make some kind of link between the book and the actual artifacts and skeletal remains that have been found. So, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so
resume.
This Book of Mormon that's what it's called, is the Book of Mormon, but it's the translation of these ancient plates. It talks about 2 different, very distinctly different groups of people at different time periods. The older one, they're called the Jaredites because they were led by a man named Jared. So they're talked about as the Jaredites, but they were a Bronze Age culture that lived approximately 2000 BC to about 600 BC. And they were destroyed in a civil war. Their last battle was right there at Cumorah, by the way. But so to make another link, that corresponds with the Adena mound builders. That's about the same timeline. And there are other links that make us think that the Jaredite people are what we now call the Adena mound builders. So these were very large people, large in stature, warlike. They worked in metals, metallurgy. They came across the ocean from Mesopotamia at the time that the Tower of Babel was, and we read about that, of course, in the Bible. So there's all kinds of archaeological evidence here of this group of people, and that's what I think that some of these large mummified remains and skeletons that we find in mounds, particularly the Adena mounds, the larger ones, I think that that's who they are is this group of people called the Jaredites.
Okay. Well,
go ahead.
You're making some interesting parallels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you said
now, there's one other group, and I'll mention the other group too.
Okay.
They're the people that we call the Nephites. So they were recorded in the Book of Mormon in a little more detail than the Jaredites were, but they were a group of Hebrews that came from Jerusalem at about 600 B.C., and they were led by a prophet named Lehi. Well, he brought his family and friends with him, and the group actually split into two factions. Some followed Lehi's wicked son Laman, and others followed his righteous son Nephi. So the two groups were coined Lamanites and Nephites, and they were known by that throughout the book. So they were constantly at war with each other, and eventually the Lamanites prevailed and killed off the Nephites at about 400 A.D. So this group of people actually corresponds with the Hopewell mound builders. There are like 5 different groups of mound builders, but it is these two groups that correspond with the people written about in the Book of Mormon. Okay?
Okay. So and we've had all these guests, just say Jason, Gerald, and it sounds like when Jason and I are talking, we're basically talking about the same people that you're talking about, the Jaredites and Nephites and Lamanites. It's just we're just using different terms for the same people.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, Nephi. Oh, okay, now say that again.
It's what the Nephites and Lamanites are, and the Jaredites are all just different names for the Adena and Hopewell that Jason and I happened to be talking about one day on the show.
Yes.
Is that
yes?
Okay.
Adena are Jaredites and Hopewell are Nephites.
Okay, and we have covered their use of the copper bracelets. A lot of the descriptions in Colonel Norris's field notes of the Smithsonian mounds being excavated in the Kanawha Valley has descriptions of many of the people being buried with 6 copper bracelets. Jason has several examples of like the copper headdress, and they're like the a deer antlers formed out of copper that the chief would wear in the ceremony. So, yeah.
It seems as though the Jaredites, the Adena, were the miners, the ancient miners that took out the Michigan copper during the Bronze Age.
Okay, so
Indians, different Native American tribes talk about them, and they say that copper mining was done by ancient marine men, and that they were these very tall, 10 feet tall people. So I think they're talking about all the same people.
Okay, and when Barbara, when you had David Brody on, he was talking about a lot of these like Adena archaic era people who when they were buried had the ochre put on them, and they seem to be seafaring, come from a seafaring culture as well, based on these harpoons. that were found buried with them. And Utahna, you mentioned that the Joseph Smith received the revelations about the Book of Mormon in the 1820s. So, okay, so he's starting to write things down in the early part of the 19th century. Well, it's not till about 1848, 1850, and when Squire and Davis are writing their book about the explorations of many of the mounds in Ohio. Colonel Norris is making his discoveries in the 1880s in the Kanawha Valley. So later archaeology is later archaeology supporting what was written.
Same things exactly of what was written in the Book of Mormon. There are so many things that with our newer archaeology, we're just proving what was written in that book. Here's an interesting thing. There was Joseph Smith, when he had a whole group of men with him, and they were traveling across the country, and they stopped in Illinois, and they climbed to the top of a mound and dug down, because there was these ancient altar-like things out of stones on the top of the mound. They dug down a little bit, and they found a very large skeleton. And he still had a spear point in his ribs. And they asked Joseph Smith, who was this person? And Joseph said, well, he prayed about it, he pondered it, and he said the visions of the past were just open to his mind, open to his understanding. And he said the man's name was Zalph. He was a righteous Lamanite, but he marched under the great general and king Onondagas, who was known from the Eastern Sea, which would be out by the Hilltop, to the Rocky Mountains. And so here he's talking about this burial in a mound that these people, the man who's laying there, his general was known from the Hilltop clear to the Rocky Mountains. Well, years later, the University of Illinois did a dig on that very same mound, and they pulled out artifacts that were from the Rocky Mountain area, obsidian from Yellowstone, and they also found artifacts in that mound that were from the east, the exact area that this general was known from. So here it is that, and Joseph Smith also said that this man had died during the last great battles between the Nephites and Lamanites, which would date this burial to approximately 400 AD. Well, the university finds that, and they had nothing to do with, they didn't know Joseph Smith or didn't even know the story. This was just a university that did the dig. And they dated that mound to between 100 BC and 500 AD, which is exactly the right time period, the artifacts from exactly the right area that Joseph Smith mentioned 156 years before that dig was even done. And he knew that from the Book of Mormon.
Okay, and
and by revelation, of course.
Oh yeah, I understand. Yeah, and there's also what just over the years I've watched some of Wayne, our other boss, his lectures, and he's spoken about some of these entrances to hill forts, and there's the unknown or unnamed hill fort in Butler County, Ohio, that Squire and Davis have in their book, that has these really intricate passageways that make it unassailable for an attacker. It's like, brilliant engineering. Have you come across anything like that in the Book of Mormon?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It talks about all the warfare between the Nephites and the Lamanites. And the Nephites, they threw up these palisades around the cities. They dug ditches and raised up berms. And just like you're saying, the one you're talking about is where the place of entrance goes in, and then there are these earth berms that make it almost like a maze for the attackers to go in there.
Exactly.
And the Nephites could stand upon the walls that they built and the towers around these fortified cities, and they could protect themselves. And that is absolutely spoken of in the Book of Mormon many, many times about these cities that they fortified that way.
Okay. So, what? Okay. So, you've brought up today's carbon-14 dating is predicting or confirming what was written. You said almost like 160 years earlier. These other maze-like entrance ways. What else is in the Book of Mormon that just shows a parallel with the actual history?
Okay. Well, there are many things that were mentioned in the Book of Mormon that critics of it, they say, well, those things don't even exist in the archaeological record. They'll mention things like horses, elephants, ancient brass, things of this nature. Well, it's true that even still today, most of the time you hear that there was no ancient brass in North America. But that's completely not true. Brass was mentioned in the Book of Mormon because it was very common to the people back then, and we have found ancient brass. But what's funny is the first item of brass found, they say, oh, well, it must be newer because it's brass, and there wasn't ancient brass. And then the next one's found, and we still don't have ancient brass, so that must be newer as well. Well, when do you stop after you've got several items of ancient brass and say we do have ancient brass? You know what I mean? So there are breastplates of brass that have come right out of the mounds, brass and copper both. They've been found in mounds of Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Ohio, Kentucky, and other states. So there's that. And then there were brass bracelets that were discovered with the Bat Creek Stone of Tennessee. Now, see, that's really interesting, too, because these Book of Mormon people, the Nephites at least, were Hebrews. They came from Jerusalem. They were Hebrew people. And here's this stone from Bat Creek, Tennessee that's got Hebrew writing on it. And buried with this stone were some brass bracelets. Now, that's been dated to, I'm trying to remember, AD 32, I think it is. Ancient brass and Hebrew. And that's a direct link to the Book of Mormon record because that's exactly who those people were.
Well, now those Hebrews came over about 1,000 years BC, didn't they?
The Hebrews came about 600 BC, yes.
Okay. So that it boggles my mind that this kind of history is never taught anywhere, and it's so very important for every generation to understand the history that this country has, and the Mormons especially are so into genealogy and history and keeping records of everything,
Mm-hmm.
and yet, like Mark said, neither of us have heard about these copper plates at all, and he more than I is
Mm-hmm.
hip deep into all of the different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Have they interpreted the letters that are on any of these plates at all?
Not to my knowledge. They haven't been able to. Now, there's the Kinderhook plates. See, so many times they're considered fakes. You always get the story that, it was planted or whatever. But there's this mound near Kinderhook, Illinois. In 1843, a man dug up a skeleton, and on his chest were 6 little gold plates. They weren't made of gold, though. They were brass. And the body that they were on was like 9 feet tall. So it was one of the big guys. And these plates were inscribed with characters, and they've not been translated because there were people that looked at them. They did start to do what they could to decipher them. But when they were pronounced a hoax, a 19th century hoax, everyone completely dropped it and walked away. But if you go back to those records about the Kinderhook plates, they will tell you, those who did look at them before will tell you that 50 of the 340 signs on these plates were similar to ones from Michigan and Near Eastern signs. They said it had a relationship to ancient Semitic and Cypriot. Evidently, the writers were from the Near East. That's what they said. And so if we could just get the scholars to stop listening to who says they're all fakes and really give them a good look, and we might learn a whole lot more about our country's history.
Well, I'm afraid that scholars are very reluctant to give credence to anything that is outside the realm of what's already been declared. I mean, it's happened
absolutely
for centuries, and you do begin to wonder. I mean, these ancient cultures left us messages. I mean, it's sort of like you don't know if these plates were prayers or if they were keys and passwords to get to the other side, or the story of who they were and their life. I mean, it's just, there's so much information there. Now, how many of these plates have actually been preserved somewhere?
Well, the Kinderhook plates, there were 6 of those, and they were lost. They were plundered during the Civil War from a museum, and we only know of one of them that exists today, and it's in the Chicago Museum. But the ones from Manti, Utah, the 60 plates that John Brewer found, different people have them in their private collections, and they're just scattered to and fro. It's really hard to track down some of these things. So many of them are actually lost. We talked a little bit about the Hebrew. Back in the early 1800s, those first contact people with the natives, they talked a lot about the Hebrew culture that they could see amongst them, words, ceremonies, and all kinds of things like that. Well, there were actually some artifacts found that were Hebrew. Right there in Newark, Ohio, there were at least 5 different stones were found with Hebrew writing on them. There's we call it the Decalogue stone. There's an inscription of Moses on there with the 10 Commandments around him.
Yep.
There's another one that has Hebrew on it. They call it the Keystone. It's actually more of a plumb bob, but it's got Hebrew writing on all 4 sides of it. There were 3 more. One was called the Inscribed Head, and it was a face with Hebrew writing right across its forehead. We never hear about that one anymore because it was considered a fake. Then there was one called the Cooper Stone. Same thing with that one. It had all these faces on it and Hebrew writing on it that was illegible. They could just tell it was Hebrew. It was considered a fake. And then there was a 5th one found. It was actually in the same mound as the Decalogue stone, but much deeper. and it wasn't found until the person who found the Decalogue stone was dead in his grave. But this other one was called the Johnson-Bradner stone, and it too has Hebrew on it. It was found, it's really an interesting story, because they dug into this mound and brought out these artifacts. There were skulls. These were very, very brittle, very old. And the man who excavated, he picked up this one skull and he scooped up all the mud and everything with it so that it wouldn't fall apart because the mud was inside it and everything. And he put it in a box along with some other artifacts and sent it to a friend of his. Well, the friend received it, and it was like a month or two later. He opened the box to take a look at it, and the mud had all dried, so when he picked up this skull, it just fell apart in his hands. And a big dirt clod falls out, breaks open, and there's this little Hebrew-inscribed stone inside the skull. And you wonder how that could have happened, but what it is it's a phylactery. The ancient Hebrews, they used to put Bible quotes on their head, bound in a little box on their head and on their hand. They called them phylacteries. It helped them to remember to keep the law. It was one of the things that they did. Well, the Decalogue stone, they believe that's exactly what that was a phylactery that you hold in your hand. This particular stone that fell out of the skull was it was a little head phylactery, and that's how it had fallen into the skull over time as the skull decayed. So it was a complete surprise. That one, they never, ever could call it a hoax. And so it's a really important one because it lends credibility to the others that were found in the same area. But still, here we don't hear about these very much. You know, you say, what about the Johnson-Bradner phylactery, and nobody knows what you're talking about. Of course, it's been lost, but there are some photographs of it.
Wow. Now, are there archaeological digs now going on in Utah looking for more of these kinds of burial chambers?
Sadly, these odd kinds of burial chambers are pretty much ignored. And scholars don't want to put their reputation on the line to go after these things that seem too incredible. You'd be a laughing stock if you followed up on some of these things. But that's exactly what we're trying to get going, is someone to help investigate these manti plates that were found. The cave that they came out of, the entrance was closed with dynamite. Another entrance was used, a really small one that was covered over, and the only man who knew where that was has passed away. So it's really hard. We think we have the right area, the right site, and everything, but where do you get an archaeologist that's willing to go out on the line to do it?
Is it on private territory or private ground?
No, it isn't. It's ground that's controlled by the government, so there's nothing that can be done there at this time. It would seriously take a good archaeologist that was willing to jump through the right hoops to be able to do it. If it were on private property, we'd only need the permission of the owner.
Right.
Unless, of course, you find the body.
Well, I mean, that's the sad thing. I mean, the one you're talking about, I mean, there were 10 bodies in there, or sarcophaguses, or whatever, or were there more in that particular
in
site?
the one in Manti?
Yeah.
There were just two there. There were just the
Okay.
two. They were in large stone sarcophagus, each one, the male and the female, and they were stacked kind of like on shelves in the wall, one above the other. And the man who discovered them, he pried the lids off, and then he carefully pulled down the straw-like cloth that was around them and blankets that were coated with pine pitch. He pulled those things down and saw the bodies, and then he couldn't get any pictures inside the tomb for some reason. I don't know if there was radon gas or what it was, but he couldn't get photographs, so he just drew some pictures. And they're absolutely fascinating pictures because there's a lot of things about this particular site that points to Bronze Age people. Stone boxes with metal plates in them and pictures on the boxes that have horse and chariot with the wheel cross, which is very Bronze Age. They correspond with a lot of different things that point to his sword. The male had a sword laying next to him, and it's a Bronze Age sword. And there was this little stone ring that was laying next to the female, and it was actually dated at one point to 1500 BC.
Wow.
So
I know that every copper mine, the copper in every copper mine has a DNA marker for it, so that they can take copper from almost anywhere, analyze it, and know exactly where it came from. So did they do that with any of these copper tablets that were discovered to see where the copper came from?
I don't believe they did. Now, they did take some, they took them out of the tomb and photographed them. And the photographer, interestingly, he said that the copper were really strange and really brittle, and if you dropped them, they would shatter like glass. And that seemed so odd to me until I was doing some research on the Michigan copper that was taken, mined during the Bronze Age. Well, there was a shipwreck that went down, and it had Michigan copper on it. It was a Bronze Age shipwreck in the Mediterranean. And when they looked at the copper from that, the ingots were done with the same method that, and they were of the same purity that they would have had to have come from Michigan. And what was so interesting about them is they were porous and brittle, and if you dropped them, they would shatter like glass. That's what they said. So that told me that the copper that was in Brewer's Cave in Manti was probably Michigan copper. Again, pointing to Bronze Age, and that's pretty old.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, the Michigan copper is, was famous for its purity, so that, it's easily identifiable as that particular mine. They can do the same stuff with iron, I believe, as well. But, they can actually tell you what mine it came from, which is fascinating to me. But, you've got such, the stuff that you've been talking about here this is the first time I've heard about how many different cultures had these plates that they had saved that were historical and spiritually connected to them.
Yes.
Which goes to show that no matter how old you get, there's always something new to learn. And it's fascinating. Now, especially also the giants, because of course giants did not exist according to scientists. They were just physical anomalies. But my belief is that there were tribes of giants. In all the research that I've done, and I can't really prove it, and I'm not a scientist, but I believe absolutely there were tribes of giants on this continent at one time. And it makes sense to me that they would have been integrated into whatever cultures were here. And this in North America especially has been a mixing pot for cultures within the Norse and Judaism, and the latecomers would be the Europeans, because everybody else was already here pilfering our copper mines, and I mean even the Chinese were here. So it's no surprise, but it seems to me that the tombs that you're talking about, I think somebody told one of the men, and I just briefly read through something earlier today, that there were other tombs in the area, which would imply that there are more of these tombs out there that haven't yet been opened.
I'm sure that there are. In Utah alone, we have several sites of these giants, these red-haired people that were very, very, very old. They even made national news headlines in the 1800s.
Oh, yeah.
They talked about the mummies in Utah actually is what proved the existence of these people. And then there are people like Ralph Glidden, who exhumed over 3,000 skeletons of this large race of people just on Catalina Island alone. They were blonde-haired. He said they were highly intelligent. There are photographs of him standing over large skeletons and everything. So we can't say anymore that they don't exist. They do.
I find it so strange that the Mormons are so involved in preserving people's history, preserving their genealogy, helping them to connect to their roots, that it wouldn't spill over to finding out where these people came from and preserving their history, whatever it is and whatever can be preserved.
Yes, absolutely.
It is. Now, are you writing a book? This seems perfect for you to write a book on.
I've been asked to. I probably should. I put a DVD presentation together, and there's just so much more. I really should start a book on this. So much information.
You really should, because and tying in the journey of the Mormons to get to Utah and how they got there and how they made that their home is an incredible story, but so is the history of the land that they crossed, and every place they did stop, they left. I mean, some people stayed. Not everybody decided to do the migration, so that there are stop places where they were for a while before they were forced out because of people not understanding that they meant them no harm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when they did finally settle in Utah, were there Native Americans there as well that they blended in with, or was there difficulty with that?
There were some difficulties with the Native Americans, but it was mostly good. In fact, there are several of the Native Americans that were baptized members of the Mormon Church. Way back then, some prided themselves on being friends of Brigham Young. It was under the direction of Brigham Young when this church moved into Utah after Joseph Smith was martyred. Then Brigham Young led them out to Utah, and his policy was to feed them rather than fight them. So for the most part, they got along very well.
Well, they seem to
and
have
of course,
survived beautifully.
He knew that they believed that those Native Americans are descendants of the Lamanites spoken of in the Book of Mormon. They're the same people. The Nephites were killed off, but the brother, Laman, his descendants are the Lamanites, that we call them Lamanites, but they're the Native Americans. Those are remnants of the Lamanite people, which is also some of the Nephites because they intermixed. So if you're going genealogy specific, then there's the blood of both. But those are Levite people.
I've always wondered that the Mormon Church has done what it's done with the genealogy is mind-boggling. Where did that come from? Is there something that says it's important to remember your roots and to start to assemble material? I mean, where did that come from? I mean, it's an amazing service that they have done for humanity, but where did it come from?
Well, they believe that ordinances, temple ordinances, need to be done that seals families together, all the way back. So follow the genealogy and seal parents to children so that they're all connected in the hereafter.
Gotcha.
So that's where that comes from. Families are extremely important, both here and in the hereafter.
Well, the work that the church has done is is of such a service that it's unbelievable. I personally know one person who actually found her father during doing the genealogy and the DNA testing that went along with it. It was amazing. She was shocked. It was when she got the notice. It was like, oh my God, I found my father. And it was such a gift. And every now and then I kind of hope, a distant relative or somebody I don't really know turns up and I can, have the same kind of experience, like a long lost half brother or sister or something like that. I'm not sure my father was that active, but he might have been. So it's kind of like it gives some people peace of mind. It gives some people a relative that they've been searching for their entire life. It's an amazing service, and I don't think you get the credit for it that you really should, because it certainly has helped so many people find peace and joy, and that's a gift in and of itself. But have they done any DNA testing on any of the giants that they have found?
I am told that some giants in southern Utah a few decades ago actually had DNA testing done, but I have not been able to track down any information on that. There were giants that were taken and even shown at the World's Fair and things like that, and then returned to Utah, but then I can't figure out where they were. I think, sadly, that many of them must have been repatriated when the Repatriation Act was passed, and so many, the Smithsonian themselves, I think they repatriated over 6,000 individual human remains at that time. And I suspect that's where a lot of the giant skeletons they had went. But I'm guessing that must be where some of these others that we hear of, Lovelock Cave, Nevada, there were giant skulls there on display for a long, long time. And now all of a sudden they're not. And all I can think is that maybe they were repatriated.
I know the red-haired giants in Nevada were found in a cave when they were going to get the guano, the back guano, and they discovered first the spear points and things like that, and then they actually discovered the bodies. Gee, it's I mean, I understand disturbing the resting place of someone is not a good idea, but I mean, with the giants though, finding a haploid group, being able to link them or not link them to whoever's here on the planet now would be phenomenal. I know a lot of the giants had double rows of teeth and extra digits and things like that, and I had a friend who had the red hair and the double rows of teeth and the extra digits, and she said it was very common in her family, and most people just had the extra digits cut off and the teeth pulled out. So it would be interesting to know if they did blend in with who was here, or if they were a completely different blood type that isn't here any longer. It makes one want to find an unrepatrinated skull with teeth in it that you could do a little drilling on, just to sort of fill in the gap. You don't want to in any way desecrate somebody's final resting place, but at the same time it would answer so many questions for they have no trouble doing it to mummies, and Lord knows the giant skeletons that were dug up were either desecrated, taken as trophies in doorstops, or are in private collections. If we're getting kind of close to the end, do you have any way that people can contact you if they want to find out more information about what you do?
Oh, for sure. My email address my email address. Should I just say what it is?
Just say what it is.
Okay. It's my name, Utahna, UTAHNA, _@hotmail.com.
Okay.
And then I'm also on Facebook, and I have a Facebook group called Ancient Historical Research Foundation. So I can be contacted either of those places.
Well, I know that we're going to have you back on because both Mark and I are going to do a lot of homework and learn a lot more about what you do because you've opened some doors for us that are fascinating, and I know that he will definitely be in touch with you, and so will I. And both of us will be pushing you to write a book because I think the information, just that you casually discharged tonight, will fascinate a lot of people. It could easily open doors and help bring a greater awareness to what's going on, and might even find an archaeologist who's willing to risk his reputation and his career on on digging some of this stuff up and finding out about it. There's always somebody out there that will take that risk and that chance. And you've done an amazing amount of work on all of this stuff. I know you do tours, and I would imagine that can be found out on your Facebook as well.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay, great.
And I did have a DVD on the giants and the relation with the Jaredite people. That if anyone's interested in that, they can ask me about that too.
Okay, is that available through you or the website?
Yes, through me at this point. It's a 98-minute DVD on a lot of what we've talked about tonight.
Oh, that sounds fabulous. Well, thank you so very much for being here tonight. We so appreciate your sharing your information and your time and your energy. And, we will definitely be in touch so we can get you back on for a 2-hour stint and really dig into a lot of this material.
Okay, sounds good.